In today's video, we're going to continue our teen bedroom makeover, and we're going to upholster this wingback chair, and we're going to add a fun detail to the back that will show some high school spirit. So when I bought this chair, it was already completely ripped apart, which is a lot of the hard work. I don't have any of the original fabric to make a pattern out of, which is fine because I usually don't use it for a pattern anyways. And they already sanded down these legs to the raw wood. Normally with chalk paint, you don't have to sand down to the raw wood. You would just give it a light scuff if it was super shiny. And if it's not super shiny, just clean, paint, and go. In this case, it's sanded, we've wiped off the dust, and we're ready to paint. When I'm not using my sprayer to seal, I really love using this Worcester foam brush. It goes on pretty neat and eliminates brush strokes. I'm using DIY Big Top because it's pretty self-leveling, it's all natural and solvent-free, so I can use it in the house without having to wear a mask. I'm just going to paint this on here and make sure it goes nice and smooth. Occasionally you'll get bubbles like right there. If you just go nice and soft over the bubbles, they'll go away. The bubbles usually happen when you push too hard with your brush. I'm going to go ahead and get this coat on there. It looks a little white, but it will dry smooth with a little bit of a satin finish. And then when it's dry, I will go ahead and add one more coat. To get started, we're going to have to cut a piece for the back. I just took a piece of my fabric that I'm using, and I've left about 4 or 5 inches on top and 4 or 5 inches on the bottom. And this piece is folded in half. So that gives me more than enough to staple on the top, and then I'm going to pull it through and pull it through the bottom. So let's flip this around here first. I'm using my Central Pneumatic staple gun. I have it set up with 1/2 inch 18 gauge staples that I purchased at Home Depot. The gun came from Harbor Freight, but I think you can get them online, so we'll post a link below. PSI is set to 90 on my air compressor, so I'm just going to attach this. You could also upholster just using a regular handheld staple gun. On a project this big, I think I would definitely get a hand cramp, so I like using this gun. I've got this centered here. I'm gonna go ahead and staple it. You wanna pull nice and tight, but not so much that you're gonna get puckers. And don't worry that it's not super tight on this side because we're gonna pull it from the bottom and that'll add some more tension. So I'm just gonna come in through the middle and start stapling. So this particular chair comes down like this, but what I'm going to do before I start working on those dips is I'm going to come from the bottom and then pull up, get this nice and tight, and then I'll pull these edges tight so the dip is nice and smooth. So we have to make allowances for the wood that's on the chair. So right in here is where the back connects to the wood. I don't know if you can see daylight through here, and then it's connected here. So I'm going to need to make a snip in my fabric to pull it through. So if I feel, I can see where that needs to go. So I'm going to cut my fabric down to that area. Now do a little bit at a time, so that way you don't cut too much. Once I've done that cut, I'm going to come around here and do a similar cut, just coming around to that area. Because obviously it's going to need to be cut more, right? I'm just doing like little by little so I can make sure it's correct. But I'm wanting to make sure, especially with this fabric, that my lines are nice and straight. So before I cut more, I'm going to pull it down here on the bottom. And I'm going to do similar cuts because there's also boards back here. So I'm just going to come in from the bottom and cut that. And cut that. Okay, not all the way. I can cut a little more if needed. I'm going to tuck this little tail in through here, and then I'm going to go back up to the top and cut some more. We've got these leftover pieces of fabric. I'm going to take them, now that I've made my cuts top and bottom, and push them through to the back. If you're worried about splinters or rogue staples, you definitely want to wear gloves for this because I do tend to get staples with my fingers. I'm going to do the same thing to the other side and pull this extra fabric through the back. I haven't even stapled it, and you can already see that the fabric is getting nice and tight just from pulling it through where it's supposed to be. I'm just adding an extra cut to kind of get it around this bar. Sometimes you have to do that depending on how thick your bar is. And then I'm going to take this fabric and pull it through the bottom. Now we're left with this weird fabric up here, and I'm just going to fold it under and pull it tight. You can even cut so you don't have excess fabric. I'm going to cut this off. Once you've got it folded right, it's not going to have any puckers, and you can put your hand through here to pull that, and then you can pull this one down, and you can see that it's nice and smooth. You're going to do the same thing to the other side. Now that I've got that, I'm just going to come across here and staple, making sure that I'm not getting pleating, that all my lines are straight. If you're doing this for the first time, don't use a fabric that has stripes. The other side, we've done the same thing, and I'm just going to staple that. Always being mindful of your other hand that's pulling the fabric, that you don't staple your hand. When you get started on this, have somebody looking on the other side, especially if you have stripes, to make sure there's no puckers. Once you've got that, you're going to pull this nice and tight, but not so much that you get wrinkles, and make sure that you're keeping even pressure all the way along when you're pulling it, so that way the tension is straight. I'm just going to add some more staples. Also, see how I'm pulling up? Do not take this piece and staple down, because if you do, when you go to upholster the seat, you won't have anywhere to upholster it to. So make sure that you're always upholstering up and in so you can get all your sides done. That's done. I have all this extra fabric here. I don't need it. So I'm gonna take and cut this off. It's really not anything I can use anywhere anyways, but I'm just gonna cut that off so that way I don't have bunchy fabric back here. I know it's a hot mess edge, but I tell you, when you take apart the other chair, if it already when you take apart your chair and you see the way that the fabric's cut on the inside, you'll notice that I'm no different than anybody else, because those cuts aren't super neat either. I'm coming across the bottom and stapling all the way to the top. Done. Okay, I'm also going to take and cut off this excess fabric and the excess fabric on the other side. So I've got this next piece here. I just laid it out to see how big, gave myself a couple inches, 4 inches on the top, 4 inches on the bottom. I probably wind up wasting, since I don't have a pattern, about a yard or so of fabric. But in the long run, this is just the way I've learned to do it. So if you want to use existing fabric as patterns, go right on ahead. So just like when we were doing the back, we're gonna have a bar to go around here and a bar to go around there. So I'm gonna lay out my fabric. And you want your fabric to be going in the same direction as the back of your chair. So I'm just gonna lay it out like this. And we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna cut along this bar here, cut along this bar here, and then pull the fabric through the back. And then the next piece of fabric is gonna pull underneath this arm here. This is gonna need an extra snip because it's gonna be going around this part of the seat right here. You can kind of see the daylight there through that hole. So I've got to cut it, I'm gonna use my fingers, I got to cut it like right here. Some of it you kind of have to do by feel. So just cut a little bit, see if it's right, and then you can snip a little more if you need to. We're going to be wrapping this around the arm here, but we have a ton of excess. So I'm going to cut off some of the excess so that way it's not getting in my way. I'm going to cut it square kind of out this way of excess fabric. Just kind of mimicking the line of the chair. I'm going to come from this angle and cut at an angle towards the arm. Just a little bit, not all the way, just because you don't want to do so much that you can't wrap it around. Getting there. This part's always nerve-wracking to me. Okay, so I'm going to cut a few spots like that, so that way I can come around. This top part here, you've got it folded over, right? So you're going to make sure that, see, this is our initial fold. We're going to fold this fabric and bring it like that and staple on this side on the back, so that way there's no gap between this part of the fabric and that part of the fabric. Come across here and staple around the curve of the chair. You may get a few puckers, and that's okay. And you're gonna wanna use your finger to like hold it, but remember that you haven't stapled this back part here that's poking through the back of the chair. So you'll get it a little tighter when you do that. So the piece that goes on this side, I'm actually gonna bring around to the edge here, I think. Okay, once I get to here, I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna come across the back and pull this part over. Now that I'm done pulling pieces, instead of pulling it this way so there's gap, I'm gonna pull this over this way. So that way there's no daylight showing through to the back. So this part has these little corners I've cut. The fabric that I'm gonna be putting on here is gonna come across here and cover that up. And then I'm gonna come underneath here and staple, and then the fabric will just come underneath this way. Here's where it can be fun on the arm. There's a million ways to do it. I'm gonna take the fabric, I'm gonna staple under here and then staple back that way, and we'll have a pleat right there on that arm. And then we're just gonna come around this way with it. So you just work a little bit at a time. Fold, staple, fold, staple. And this way you don't have to have like a piece here. Another way to do it is to just staple it over the edge, then staple it over the edge this way, and then have like a piece that goes on top. But if you do it this way, we just have like these neat little pleats, it looks just fine, and then you don't have to add that. And disclaimer, I'm totally not a professional upholsterer. I've never taken any professional upholstery classes. This is just the way I do my chairs. And actually, most of the time I don't even sell my upholstery. It's just for in my home. And it's such a great way to take an old piece of furniture and give it new life without spending $700 to have it upholstered. So we've got this excess fabric here from going under this bar here. And I'm just gonna give it another snip. I'm gonna tuck it down in my chair. And I might have to add an extra snip. A lot of this is you just do a little few cuts at a time and see where you need to cut the fabric and feel for it. So now I know that I've got it right. It's nice and smooth like along here. I do have some puckering here, which if I would have sewn this and made it, custom fit, then it wouldn't have that. But for my purposes, this is great. I'm using my hand to make sure it's smooth underneath because that'll be the last place we staple it, and making sure that this right here is nice and smooth. The seat cushion is gonna come up here. So if this down here isn't perfect, don't stress out about it. A lot of that will be covered. I'm gonna staple across this line, and then I'll staple across here. Okay, just like the other one, I'm going to take my fabric and pull up, so that way when I pull the fabric in for the seat, I have still a hole. If I pull down, then I won't have anywhere to staple my fabric for the seat. I'm going to pull up and staple. And then cut off my excess fabric. I'm going to do the exact same thing to the other side. Okay, so on this chair, we are not using the cushion separately. We're going to attach the cushion down, even though that's not the way it was originally designed, for two reasons. One, I hate sewing. Actually, three reasons. Two, I have a gal that could do it for me, but I don't have time to wait. And third, and most important, if it's attached and doesn't come off, nobody will throw it off and nobody can shove stuff underneath it, which is what happens a lot in teenager rooms. So to get started, I'm going to take and make a cut here and a cut here, so that way my fabric can slide through the back, and then I'll be making a few more cuts to slide it over the front. My next cut is to go around the arm of it, so I'm not going to cut all the way to here because then I'll have like this big slit. I'll cut to about here so I can tuck it in and pull it around. That'll give me about 5 inches from the fold that comes right by this arm here. Now that that's made, I can take and pull this fabric through this hole here. Coming around this side of the cushion is really the most difficult part. So once you get your cut right, you may have to add an extra cut just to get it to go around. I like to staple this in place because this really can't move one way or the other, and then I'll staple it on the other side, then I'll do the back, and then I'll do the front, and this is the very last piece that I staple. So I'm going to staple this down here because this is going to have a piece that comes straight down this way and comes over this seam. So I'm going to staple underneath here so that way there's nothing showing here. And then I'm going to take this fabric here, will come straight down here, this piece that's covering here. So on this side, which won't show, I'm just going to add some staples there so that way it holds this corner in place. And I'm going to do the same staples on the other corner. So now I'm going to do the front. I'm going to pull this as tightly as possible without making it pucker. And then I'm going to do until I get about 1 inch from each leg. Then I'll stop and I'll snip the fabric. And then we'll go around the leg and around each side. So now I'm going to take, and the leg is right here, so I'm going to snip a straight line down from there all the way up to the leg. So that way I can pull this fabric underneath. Tell me if it's too tight. So I'm taking, this is my back flap of fabric, and I'm pulling it up this way so that way there's not any gap on the front side where there's going to be like daylight. If I go like this, then there's this gap right here, but if I pull it up, just make sure it's nice and tight. And I'm just going to come across and staple each side. Now I'm going to cut off excess fabric. I made a slit here around this side of the leg, so I need to do a similar slit right here around the back. And then I've got a lot of excess fabric that we'll cut off in a minute. I'm going to pull this first pleat. It's going to come backwards like this. It's going to come over this edge and around, and I'm going to staple it. And when I'm all done, I'll take and steam this down, and I may even put like a little bead of hot glue to help hold that down. But for right now, I'm just going to come staple it. We're going to put pleat number 2 around the side and staple underneath the leg. And then I'm going to come around this edge. So right here is where the top of the leg is. And this is going to have some trim and nail head that will cover up my staples. I'm going to come across and staple. This is the leftover fabric from the sides that I need to staple up. If I staple down, you might have a gap there. So if you pull up, it just makes sure it's nice and tight and there's no gaps that'll show any daylight. I'm gonna add batting to this side because it was missing when I got the chair. This is just the batting from the craft store. I think this is the heirloom batting. It's kind of ivory colored. It's my favorite. I'm going to fold my fabric on the top, and I'm going to staple from the edge all the way over to here. That way my fabric stays where I want. Then I will start stapling down the side and under the arm. So I've got all this extra fabric right here, and I'm just going to cut off a little bit, not all of it. You never want to cut too much. Now I'm going to take this edge here, and I'm going to, as I come around this corner, I'm going to fold under my fabric. I don't know if that's the right way or not, but I like to do it so it's neat. So that way when I cover it with trim, it's that much easier. And this whole piece right here, like see how there's a little pleat there? This will all be covered with trim. And then I'm going to fold this part under here. Staple along here because I'm going to have trim that comes all along there. And then I'll fold this edge under here. Then I'm going to make sure that this line is nice and straight, that they're not crooked. This edge can be a little complicated because you've got some weird angles. So if you've got stripes, just make sure they're still vertical and not sideways. And then just come down. The trim will come all along here and down this way, so none of these staples will be exposed once we trim it out. The next step is going to be to trim this piece right here up into this corner. I'm going to start on this side though and come across. So I'm just going to take this excess fabric, Fold it up so I get a nice crisp line, and then I'm going to pull it around backwards, staple it on the back side. So I'm coming from the bottom and going up this way and pulling taut without making my stripes crooked. This is a school shirt. We slit it down the middle. The biggest they make is an extra large, so I'm gonna have to stretch it to fit. So when and if he's ever tired of having his school shirt, I can just take it off and do it the correct and proper way. I'll save some extra fabric. But for now, this is kind of fun. So I'm using the ribbing and I'm going across this way to staple it, and then I'll do some cutting and stretching. Got it?
Jami now has 3 hands.
You ready?
Yep.
This shirt, I wish they had like a 3XL, but they only had an XL.
Luckily it's cotton. It should get stretchy.
So rather than pull it to go underneath here, I'm just gonna pull it to the very, like right here. And then when I put trim, it'll cover up that part of the wood. Let me disclaim that I never recommend using jersey knit for upholstery. A, it's a pain in the butt. B, it stretches like crazy. And C, I'm not even sure how long it's gonna last. Hopefully it looks cool and my son loves it. I'm definitely gonna have some extra fabric handy, so if the jersey knit doesn't last, I can rip it off and then I'll cover it the appropriate way. But for now, I think it's a fun look and it gives some personality to a very mature chair and makes it look like a teenage room. Last but not least, we're gonna close up this edge here. Jersey knit is like really thin, and so if you just try to go through one portion of it and it's not doubled over, it just blows holes in it. I know that because I've had some holes happen. Luckily, I have a few t-shirts on hand, and they were only $5 at the school. So I'm gonna take and fold this fabric inside, so that way when I'm doing this edge, it's got like multiple layers of fabric, and it's not a single layer of jersey knit. This chair's like a mullet. It's like business in the front, party in the back. So now I'm adding the trim that's covering up all the staples. When the trim is glued on, then we'll put the nail head on. And I'm just taking glue, hot glue, not cold. I know they make cold and hot. I like the hot glue that's made for fabric. And I'm just going to put a bead of glue all along here and go along this whole side, around the bottom and across the other arm and down. Okay, the next part, we're going to glue it across this bottom here to cover up our staple line and the edge of our chair. When that's done, then we'll go up each side, and then we just have a little bit more to do on the front, and our trim will be done. So I have a few imperfections. See, there's little puckers down here that honestly, once it gets put in the room, nobody will probably even notice. But when you're using jersey knit, it stretches and pulls unlike regular fabric. And so it's virtually impossible to get no puckers. So I'm just gonna live with it. Okay, so this edge likes to fray a little bit. So if you heat seal it, it'll keep it from fraying. I'm gonna just put this around these legs in the front, and then I am done with trim. Also, remember how I said, put a little glue back here, and that'll just hold that in place. Or if you know how to do invisible stitching, you could invisible stitch that. I don't know, so hot glue it is. I've done this on a ton of projects and never had a problem. So disclaimer, I am not a professional upholsterer. Every time we do a video, we get comments, that's not how you do it. So probably not. Also, I don't recommend upholstering with a t-shirt. I have no idea how it's gonna hold up. It turned out okay. It would definitely be better with upholstery fabric, but my teenager is gonna think it's awesome.
Well, that's on the back of the chair. I mean, as long as he's not like kicking it or something, I think it'll be okay.
Well, you never know.
He might. This was the easiest upholstery job ever for me. Usually I have to tear them apart for about an hour, hour and a half, and this one was already done.
We'll link another upholstery video below where you can watch Zeb rip apart a chair. We also didn't put a dust cover underneath because I forgot to buy it and we needed to finish the video. So if you want to know how to do that, also watch that video. Basically, you're just going to buy the Oli fabric or Oli cloth, which is a dust cover, and you just staple it underneath. It's pretty simple. I figure the back of this chair only has to last a couple of years. When he goes off to college, maybe I'll switch it out to whatever college he's on or redesign a room. I have no idea. Or it'll go with him when he gets married and his wife will be like, thank you for that Lehi Pioneer chair that I now have to decorate around. And
That purple's amazing.
Be like, just put it against the wall. Here's a list of products I use that we sell on our website. The legs were painted with fairy chalk mother in gunmetal using our dusty brush. And then we sealed it with Big Top. We used a Worcester foam brush, which we don't carry, but we'll drop the link below. The fabric is from Hobby Lobby, as well as the trim and the hot glue. And then on the very back, the shirt we just picked up for $5 at the high school. Definitely we're gonna spray it with Scotch Guard. You can pick that up on Amazon or any of your local department stores. And it'll be ready to go in his room. To get the same look as we did on the legs on this chair, be sure to go to jamirayvintage.com for your paint. Don't forget to hit the notifications button because this chair is going to have an equally awesome desk, right?
Yep. I'm in the middle of building the desk right now. I know I said we were going to do it Monday, but it takes 24 to 48 hours to cure up with the products I used, which will be explained in the video.
So hit that notifications button. Be sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to Jami Ray Vintage for more
DIY.